kid in the back of the classroom.
I love that, the slouch like the bored kid. Anyway, I want to bring in Richard Socarides, former senior advisor in the Clinton White House, now writer for the NewYorker.com. Still have Tom Davis, former Republican congressman from Virginia. Rashad Robinson, executive director of colorofchange.org, the nation's largest African-American online political organization. Also a board member of All Out, LGBT equality group organizing opposition to Russia's anti-gay policies. And we have Julia Yaffe, senior editor for the New Republic magazine and a former Moscow correspondent for the New Yorker and Foreign Policy magazine. So we say in the intro there, the first time in decades that an American president has canceled a sit-down with a Russian leader. I think the last time we dug it up would have been LBJ in 1968, 45 years ago this month. He canceled the meeting after the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. So I think that's the last time you had something like this. Maybe a slightly different. Julia's shaking her head there. We just wanted to get the 68 reference in. But I'm curious about just the question of. I think the conventional wisdom around the decision here to cancel the meeting was basically it was kind of a pointless exercise. Did Obama really have a choice at this point? Was anything going to come out of this? And Julia, I just wondered, do you share that basic opinion? Was there really no point to this meeting given all of the tensions we just described?
I think this was a good decision on Obama's part. I just want to go back to the canceling meetings things. Actually, about a year ago, there was, Obama didn't go to a summit because it was September. It was right before the election. Before that, Putin didn't go to a summit with Obama. So they've been kind of like canceling getting drinks together for a while now. As for what they have to talk about, things have been going downhill since about 2 years ago, since the intervention in Libya. The Russians felt duped. They felt that, especially after Gaddafi was killed, I think that personally hit Putin very hard. And then you had the American ambassador on the ground being harassed by pro-Kremlin groups and pro-Kremlin TV channels, or Kremlin-owned TV channels, and it's just been snowballing ever since. I don't think it's that. When Putin and Obama get together, it's not like they're working out the nitty-gritty, the two of them. A lot of that stuff is worked out beforehand. It's kind of a symbolic acknowledgement on both sides. You'll notice the Russians aren't angry at this move. They are also saying, we recognize that we have to recalibrate, and we're still going to keep working together. You're not seeing an angry response out of Moscow. I think this is an acknowledgement on both sides that we need to kind of step back and recalibrate.
Also, I'm curious about that question of how this is playing in Russia, because a lot of the conversation here in the United States is about denying Putin the prestige that comes with having a meeting with the American leader. Is this how do you think is this being portrayed by the media in Russia? How is this perceived by the public in Russia? And is Putin worried that his prestige suffers a little bit because of this?
No, I think. Look, the way it's being played in Russia is it's being downplayed, because if you make a stink over it, you acknowledge the fact that it was a snub or a slap in the face, right? So it's like, okay, he's not coming, we'll see each other another time. And we'll see each other on the sidelines of the G20 summit in St. Petersburg. As for how Putin sees it, he probably, it probably makes him respect Obama a little bit more. I think Putin has seen Obama as a kind of weak president. He can't quite understand, for example, when Obama tells him, I have Congress to deal with, I can't get everything through Congress. Putin will say, well, I also have a Congress. Get it through. I can get my stuff through. So anyway, so this is kind of like.
Putin doesn't have the Tea Party, though. I know that.
He also doesn't have a parliament. I'm just thinking it probably makes him seem stronger to Putin.
Well, Richard, I just wonder, given the moment that we've sort of reached here in relations between the two countries and the two leaders, what do you think it would take to sort of restart, have meetings again between Obama and Putin? What would have to happen?
The most interesting thing I thought about this was that it was the White House decided it was in their interest to spread out the reasons for canceling this summit. But I think the reality is that but for the Snowden episode, the summit would have gone forward. And, I think it was such a poke in the eye to us and to President Obama personally and to the new Secretary of State that they just felt that was it was the straw that broke the camel's back. But had Snowden not been granted this 1-year citizenship, this 1-year status that he's got, and even if he was just still at the airport, I bet President Obama would have gone. The other thing was so interesting about the press conference, and the little clip you played, was how Obama talks about his counterpart. I mean, he calls him. He didn't say Vladimir, or he didn't, go by his official title. He calls him Putin. I mean, it was like
and refers to him as a kid slouching in the back of the class. That's even.
It was not diplomatic, right? I mean, you've been around these diplomats. I mean, they're very careful the way they talk about him. Now, I don't know if the president was just kind of, it was Friday afternoon. He was kind of on a roll, but boy, that is not the way you talk about a leader.
He's playing to the American press. He's playing to the American public.
But how does that go? How do you think Putin will get the translation? Putin will hear that.
That's a diss. You don't talk about Putin like that. Putin's the father of a nation and an empire.
But you were saying you think maybe this built a little bit of respect for Obama on Putin's part, but being talked to that way maybe has that. Anyway, I want to pick this up after this. I want to get into as well the issue with the Olympics and the issue with the anti-gay laws in Russia. We'll get to that after this. So there wasn't really a lot of loud, reaction, I think, from Republicans to the president's, to the announcement this week that the meeting with Putin would be canceled. But I did notice this. This was John Boehner's office was contacted for comment, and a Boehner spokesman said the president's signature foreign policy accomplishment from the first term, a reset with Russia, has just collapsed. Seemed like a little gloating was going on over there. Although I did notice, other Republicans didn't seem to be joining in the chorus. But Tom, I guess what I wanted to ask you about was, there seems to be there is a split, and we've talked about this in the Republican Party sort of increasingly on foreign policy questions, where you've got the wing that was sort of dominant in the Bush era, more of like the neocon wing, the more hawkish wing, and now you've got this sort of insurgent, almost the Rand Paul non-interventionist side of things. I'm looking at Russia right now, and the more hawkish forces, it seems, see an opening here in the Republican Party, and I think in the national debate, and that is that if we're not talking to Putin anymore, maybe this is an opening to act unilaterally, like on missile defense and issues like that. I'm just curious if you have a sense of where that debate is in the Republican Party.
Our Cold War wing of the party has been looking for something for years since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and found it a little bit in these wars in the Middle East. So I think there is some of that. Both parties, by the way, have these divisions within them. These have so far not settled along partisan lines. I'm frankly not surprised by Boehner's spokesman, because it's kind of electioneering and so on, but the Republicans are pretty muted. Look, everybody's playing their role in this thing that they have to play. The president had to cancel that, I think, after the Snowden event. It would have looked very weak had he not done that. I think Moscow really didn't have much choice on Snowden. Had they given him back to the United States, Putin would have looked very, very weak under the circumstances. The good news is that talks continue underneath. We have the Secretary of Defense over there, Secretary of State talking to their people. So, business as usual.
So let's get into the question here. I think that's gotten the most press attention, and it's going to continue to get the most, I think, for months ahead, all the way through February next year with the Olympics, is the question of these new anti-gay laws in Russia. And Rashad, we kind of outlined them there at the beginning, but I wonder if you could just quickly take us through exactly what is the impact right now on gays and lesbians in Russia, and where did this come from? I think that's the other question people have.
I mean, well, we've seen these laws popping up around the world as more and more visibility happens for LGBT Americans and folks in the West. And what we're seeing, particularly in Russia, is a law that outlines what they say is propaganda. And that could mean a host of things. It could mean everything from someone who is not gay or lesbian supporting gay and lesbian people, carrying a rainbow flag, wanting to stand up. We've seen folks filming documentaries being harassed and coming under attack from these laws in Russia. And what it particularly does is it sends a message around the world about exactly where Russia stands around, not just around LGBT equality, but around human rights and freedom of assembly.
Well, so where though did the move for these laws come from? Because we think of, like, in the United States, I think we're so used to looking at the gay rights debate as, it's inevitable at this point. And gay marriage keeps popping up in other states. The polls keep moving. There's sort of, the arc of history bends towards justice, that whole thing. But in Russia, it seems like they're moving in the opposite direction. Is that the political class and maybe religious leaders trying to impose something on the masses, or does this reflect something broader about where Russian culture is moving right now?
So I think there are two things here, two things happening. First of all, this law is one of the few things that we've seen originate not from the top down, but from the bottom up. It started out as an anti-gay propaganda law in cities in central Russia, and then up in Arkhangelsk in the north, and then came down to St. Petersburg, and then down to Moscow, which then spread it to a federal level. This normally doesn't happen. Normally, laws are, there's a signal from the top, the Duma, the Russian parliament passes something. This is something that reflects, I think this is just Russia's historical unease with its role as kind of the West, but not the West. On one hand, it wants to be part of Europe. It talks about, and Putin constantly talks about how Russia's an integral and important part of Europe. On the other hand, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there hasn't been much of an ideology to hold the place together. You have the church, just like it's done for the last few hundred years, coming in, creating a national idea that's kind of a very conservative one and traditional one. And you also have this national idea forming as a response to the West. So we're the West, and homosexuality is seen as a Western import. It's seen as a fashion choice almost. All
right, well, I want to pick that up, and we'll have a lot more time at the start of the next hour, because I want to talk more about how it got to this point in Russia, what that means for the Olympics, and what the response should be from the United States, from the Olympic Committee, from the West, all of that next hour.